So today we're looking at Chapter 1, Section 7, which is completing the square. And this is basically going to help us to solve trinomials that we can't typically solve because they're not a perfect square. So do your warm-up equation so that you get familiar with what is a perfect square and how to solve. Example number 1 says solve the quadratic equation by finding square roots. So I'm not going to solve this by foiling, I'm going to solve it by actually identifying the square roots. So in this case, x squared minus 8 plus 16 will factor to be x minus 4 times x minus 4, and that equals 25. So this is the same as writing x minus 4 squared equals 25, which is important because we know 25 is a perfect square and we can actually find a square root. So we can take the square root of both sides and we're left with x minus 4 equals 5. And then we just continue to solve. So add 4 to both sides gives us x equals 4 plus or minus 5, which is the same as x equals 9 and x equals negative 1. So those are my two solutions for this particular problem. So now I'm going to show you how to actually complete the square so that we can factor a trinomial. So the first step is going to be to find 1/2 of the b, or the coefficient of the x value. In this equation above, my b is actually 16, right? Because when you have a quadratic, it's ax squared plus bx plus c. So whatever that b is, I'm going to find 1/2 of it. Then I'm going to square 1/2 of b. I'm going to take that b over 2, and I'm going to square it. And lastly, I'm going to substitute it for my c value. And I'm going to walk you through this step by step. So I took my b, I divided by 2, I squared it, and then I wrote it in for my new c value. So let's actually do this example. It says find the value of c that makes x squared plus 16x a perfect square trinomial. Well, my first step, again, is to take my b value, which is 16, and divide by 2. So I get 8. My second step is to square it. So 8 squared equals 64. And then my third step is to write it out as a new expression with the 64 replaced as my c value. So x squared plus 16x plus 64. Now this is important because this creates a perfect square for me. I can actually factor this now without any issues. So when I factor out x squared plus 16x plus 64, I get 8x plus 8 squared, which is a perfect trinomial square. That's exactly what I want when I get to the end there. Okay? Let's do one that's a little more complicated because it actually has a c value already. So I need to work around it and make sure that I get rid of that c value. I get it out of my way to begin with. So I'm going to start by saying x squared minus 12x plus 4 equals 0. And I'm going to remove that c value because it's just in my way and I don't really want to have to worry about it. So x squared minus 12x equals negative 4. Now I can do my steps to find my new c value. So I take the coefficient b. This is actually a negative 12. So negative 12 divided by 2 equals 6. I square it and I get 36. And now I write that in as my new c value. And remember, this is algebra, so whatever we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other side. So now I have x squared minus 12x plus 36 equals 32. This is a good place to be because x squared minus 12x plus 36 is actually a perfect square. It can simplify to x minus 6 squared equals 32. And then I solve the problem like I did for example number 1, where I just take the square root of both sides. So x squared minus 6 squared, the square root of that is just x minus 6, equals the square root of 32 is 4 square root of 2 plus or minus. And then I solve for x, so add 6 to both sides, so that x is equal to 6 plus or minus 4 square root of 2. And that is my perfect square solution. So if I had an x value that was 6 plus or minus 4 square root of 2, this is a perfect trinomial. It's going to factor perfectly. Let's do one more just so that you get the hang of it. This also has a c value, so I'm going to get rid of the c value from both sides and say 2x squared plus 8x equals negative 14. This one's also a little different because my coefficient for x squared is not just a 1. I don't just have a solid x squared there, I have a number. So I need to also factor out that 2 from my equation. So now I have x squared plus 4x equals negative 7. Now I can find my new c value. So I take the b, 4 divided by 2 equals 2, and then I square it and I get 4. I substitute it in, x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals negative 7 plus 4. And I factor the right side of my equation, the left side of my equation. So this is the same as x minus 4 squared equals negative 3. I take the square root of both sides. So x minus 4 equals the square root of negative 3. And there's something interesting about this problem in particular because when I continue to solve this, I add 4 to both sides. So I get x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 3. However, I can't have a negative in my radical. And we know that the square root of negative 1 is the same as I, so we pull out that number and we have x equals 4 plus or minus I square root of 3. And that's my solution. There's 2 problems here for you to do on your own. If you need to go back and watch the video a second time or follow along with some of those equations, please do. This is a little complicated. There's several steps that you need to meet, and then you also have to work with the algebra. So there's going to be lots of questions for your quick quiz today, but just make sure that you're practicing and you actually understand what the process is to finding the answers.